What's up, my wizards? It's Dev, SBMTG down there, YouTube.com. We like magic, and today we're going to finish up this $10 budget junk rares series. We have been through 4 out of the 5 colors, and we get to do the last one today, and that is white. Now, it turns out that white has an impressive array of junk rares right now, you know? I was working on like 2 or 3 different concepts before I finally landed on the concept that we finished with, which is just a traditional mono-white aggro deck. But don't let that make you think that it doesn't have some tricks up its sleeve. There's plenty of synergy in this deck. Let me show it to you. Well, the first thing I'm going to do in this junk rares deck is show you all the non-rare cards, because all of our non-rares are basically all of our 1-drops. We're going to play 4 copies of Sacred Cat, 4 copies of Expedition Envoy, and 2 copies of Gryff's Boon in this deck. Now, first of all, you may notice that I'm not playing Thraben Inspector. That's because if I did, Thraben Inspector would be the most expensive card in the entire deck. This common is 75 cents right now on TCG Player, which is unconscionable. I know that she's in, like, everything, but still, 75 cents for a common is unbelievable. We got to get that under control. Even though the set rotates in like 5 months, that's way too much for a common. So, let's play some different stuff. We're going to play the Sacred Cat to have a good blocker early game that can come back. Always good to have a resilient creature. I got no qualms with that. Expedition Envoy is just a Savannah Alliance. You know, it's a 1 mana, 2 power thing, and that's always good to have. It just kind of auto makes it into a deck that's focused around creatures. And then Gryff's Boon is awesome. It's still awesome, you guys. The card exists, you know, 1 mana to grant flying and a buff, and it can come back like, not quite Rancor or anything, but still a really, really good, very low-costed enchantment that we can put on like 3 different creatures in the course of 1 game. But onto the rares, and literally every other main deck card is rare. We're playing 26 of them in the main deck and a couple of more in the sideboard. White just has a bunch of good budget rares right now, and we actually won't play any rares in this deck below 50 cents. And one of those 50 cents rares, again, the top of our budget, is Hanweir Militia Captain, which I'm going to play a whole playset of. I think 50 cents buys us a lot here. We're playing 30 creatures in this deck, so Hanweir Militia Captain should have no problem transforming. Like it all. And then every single turn you get a guy, and Hanweir Militia Captain keeps getting bigger. That's pretty sweet. I just don't see why we wouldn't play 4 of this. Like, Thalia's Lieutenant is a little bit out of our price range. Same thing with Selfless Spirit. Those are expensive cards. But if we're going to play a 2-drop, I'd prioritize Militia Captain, especially with so many creatures in the deck. They can't deal with Militia Captain. It's going to lead to a ton of value. More 2-drops here because we can't just play, you know, 4 2-drop creatures, call it a day. We got to play 4 copies of Aethergeode Miner here, which is fine because she's only a quarter right now. Miner looks innocuous, but a lot of our key synergies are set up around this card, you know. There's a couple of different cards that synergize particularly well with Aethergeode Miner, so definitely a good 2-drop. Not to mention that, like, 2 mana 3/1, decent stats. Decent stats. Sure, it dies to, like, lots of stuff, but at least it can attack really, really safely, you know. Swing in, get your energy, any funny business, just get her out of there. Here's the first thing that Miner works, like, super well with, Solemn Recruit, which we're going to play a whole playset of, too. You know, Revolt is an underexplored mechanic. We'll call it that, you know. And even if you never get a counter on this thing, it's still a 3 mana 2/2 double strike, which is actually, like, not the worst deal in the world. But if you do get even 1 counter on it, it's a 3 mana 3/3 double strike. Like, now it can suddenly swing for 6. That's actually really stupid good. And if you get any more than just the 1 counter on it, then it starts to get out of control pretty quick. You know, having a 4/4 double strike is crazy. That'll end the game relatively quickly. And every time you blink out Aethergeode Miner at the end of the turn, Solemn Recruit will get a token or get a counter. So it's not even that hard to get this thing up to like ridiculous levels of power. Not to mention that, like, your creatures will just die. Like, your creatures will die in combat. They'll die to, like, targeted removal spells and stuff like that. And also cool to know that if any of your creatures die in combat or anything, well, you can just play Solemn Recruit second main phase, and then when you hit your end step, since some creatures died in combat, it'll go ahead and the turn it comes into play, you get that +1/+1 counter. That's pretty sweet. In some ways, Recruit might be one of the better cards with Revolt, kind of, sort of, because, you know, with things like Greenwill Liberator and such, you know, then, like, if you don't get the Revolt on Liberator, then all you get is like a 2/1. You know, but with this, even if you don't get the Revolt on it ever, then you've still got a 3 mana 2/2 double strike, which is fine, and it gives you multiple chances to get a Revolt trigger. You know, you can get 2-3 Revolt triggers in 1 game and make this thing huge, and you're not necessarily forced to get Revolt triggers right away or anything. The card is solid in and of itself. We're going to play 3 copies of Bygone Bishop in the deck, and I know that it only triggers on creatures with CMC 3 or less, but we're playing 23 of those, so I think we'll be okay. This can lead to us drawing like 2, 3, or more cards over the course of the game. Like, it's just really, really good card advantage. Even if it costs a couple of mana to pop a clue, it at least gives us something to do with our mana on turns where like we draw a dead land or something. There's just, you know, we're not playing Thraben Inspector in this deck, so this is a good way to make up for that. It's crazy that this rare that flies and produces multiple clues costs much, much less, like a third of a common that gives you 1 clue. But Thraben Inspector is objectively a better card, but still, this can lead to a ton of card advantage over the course of the game, and is a decent attacker sometimes. In the 4 slot, we're going to play a whole playset of Aetherstorm Roc in the deck, and we finally get to mess around with this card. You know, there's something I've liked about the cut of this card's jib since the first time I saw it in this deck. It's got kind of a fair amount of applications. Like, we have a creature at the top of our curve, right after this, as a matter of fact, that can put multiple creatures onto the battlefield at one time. 3, as a matter of fact. So, that's pretty stinking sweet right there. You know, you get 3 energy off of one of the creatures that we're playing. And the things like Hanweir Militia Captain, once it transforms, you'll get an energy every single turn out of the dude that it produces. So there's some cool synergy there. And Aethergeode Miner, you know, costs energy to blink her, but when she comes back into play, you'll get some energy from Aetherstorm Roc. So all that is pretty nice, actually. There's a fair amount of synergy with Roc. And even if you're not doing weird synergistic things like Miner or something like that, then we're still playing a bunch of creatures. There are 30 creatures. Literally half the deck is creatures. So you should be able to get a ridiculous amount of energy out of this over the course of the game. And when you got multiples out, it gets really stupid. Not to mention that, like, they can get pretty big over the course of the game, too. And they're tapping down your opponent's biggest creature every time you elect to expend that energy. So, like, this is actually a very solid card. It's nice to have a relatively big flyer in the air that we can make bigger and tap down opposing creatures. Like, gives us energy to use. Like, just yes to everything Roc does. Solid card. But at the very, very top of our curve, we're going to play 3 copies of Regal Caracal in the deck. This is the thing I was just talking about. Works so well with Aetherstorm Roc, you know. Play this, you get 3 energy right then and there. That's a pretty good deal. And this obviously works well with the Sacred Cat, too. That's pretty awesome. This even works really well with Hanweir Militia Captain, you know? You play a Regal Caracal and you have a Militia Captain out. Even if you have no other creatures, then you'll be able to flip that Militia Captain on your next upkeep. And, you know, it's pretty good against board wipes and stuff. Let's say you get swept one turn. Well, the next turn you play Regal Caracal, you're right back on the board with 7 power on 3 guys. Like, that's a pretty sweet deal right there. I just don't see any reason why we wouldn't play this. As far as 5 drops under $1 right now, it's just about the best we could do. But to finish up the main deck, let me tell you about a little bit of removal that we're going to play here. We're going to play 3 copies of Collective Effort and 1 copy of Captured by the Consulate. Captured by the Consulate, it could just be a 4th copy of Collective Effort, sure, but that would put us just slightly over budget. We are right on budget here. It was tough to get this deck within budget, but we barely pulled it off. But honestly, if we flipped and just played 4 copies of Effort, that would put us just a little bit above budget. So that's one reason not to do it. But if you do have the extra quarter it would take to pull that off, the Collective Effort might be a better card in this slot, but Captured by the Consulate is at least a catch-all that deals with a lot of different stuff, and that's cool. That's important to point out. But Collective Effort is just a fantastic card. Again, 30 creatures, and Regal Caracal is a creature that makes more creatures when it comes into play. So, and, you know, Hanweir Militia Captain makes a bunch of creatures over the course of the game once you transform it. So we will have we will have enough creatures to get all 3 modes if we need them most of the time. It's great to basically give our team an Anthem effect, like the creatures we already have out at least. Great to give them an Anthem effect. That +1/+1 counter is great with Solemn Recruit. Just letting you know that. That's cool. And it's just straight up removal. Being able to kill a guy is fantastic, and we don't have a whole lot of ways of doing that in this deck. Here's your lands right here. 24 planes is what we're playing. And yeah, you could play like Blighted Steppe, I guess, if you wanted to. Like, there's stuff, but I'm just trying to kiss the track here. Keep it simple, stupid. 24 planes is all we need. Speaking of simplicity, here's our simple sideboard right here. We got 3 copies of Fragmentize and 2 Forsake the Worldly to deal with artifacts and enchantments. Super simple. White's good at doing that. Let's do that. We've got Anointer Priest in there because we are putting some tokens into play. You know, Sacred Cat, Regal Caracal, Hanweir Militia Captain after it transforms. Won't be too hard to get some life off of Anointer Priest. And yeah, we can get life off of herself too when we embalm her, so that's nice. And then Compulsory Rest is just, you know, good old-fashioned removal, and it's 5 cents, so it's the cheapest thing we can play. Yes, There is more stuff you could play, but it's all a little bit more expensive. Cast Out's over $1. Declaration in Stone's like $2. You could do that, but I'm just going with Rest here. It's still a fine card. And then Gideon's Intervention is the other 2 rares that we're playing in the deck. That brings us to 28. And this can be good against just combo decks or even control decks if you can resolve it. You know, don't play Torrential Gearhulk, or you can lay board wipes. You haven't played Sweltering Suns yet? Well, you're not going to get to play it. So Gideon's Intervention can be good for all kinds of reasons. Just sort of ties up loose ends. And here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 55, which I keep saying this, that's indicative of most of the decks that we've seen. They've been pretty much mid-50s the whole time. And I like that we're closing it out with a deck that is literally as mid-50s as it gets. You know, there's some stuff that we do a little bit better than other decks. We have a fair amount of offense. We have a pretty good amount of synergy for the fact that we're just a dumb aggro deck. You know, bottom line here is that we're just trying to tap our guys. But we get a surprising amount of synergy for a deck that's just trying to do that. Now, as with all of these, the price tag is just $10, but there are some budget options I didn't end up playing that I want to tell you about, and there's a couple options that are not as budget as the stuff we are playing, but aren't expensive either, and I want to point some of those out too. Now, first of all, my first idea for this deck was just a mono-white equipments deck, which I figured would satisfy some of the people calling for a budget artifacts deck, but I want to do that deck, don't get me wrong. I just kind of wait until Hour of Devastation comes out. We'll see if there's more playable artifacts in that set. I imagine there will be, but in any case, you could just build a mono-white equipments deck here with Stonehaven Outfitter, Stonehaven Outfitter, Stoneforge Masterwork, Captain's Claws, Stitcher's Graph. There's a bunch of stuff. SRAM himself, by the way, only like 75 cents right now. So you could build that deck for really, really budget, and it would be fun too. Equipment decks are always fun. Now, another idea I had for this deck, an idea that I actually think is almost there, honestly, is just board wipes. I know it sounds pretty trite, but Planar Outburst is only like 20 cents right now. That's a steal. And Dusk Till Dawn is only like 40 cents too. So you could play a bunch of creatures that only have 2 power, like Sanctifier of Souls was an all-star in this idea. You could play some creatures like that in this deck and play Dusk Till Dawn. That would be a good idea. You could also, by the way, play Cataclysmic Gearhulk, because Cataclysmic Gearhulk is only like 70 cents right now. That's a pretty sweet deal. And in this sort of mono-white budget rares control deck that I probably should have shown to you, I'm realizing, you can also play Exquisite Archangel, which is only like 70 cents too, and it's actually a pretty dope card if you can get to it. And by the way, I should also point out that for under $1, you got cards like Eerie Interlude and Odric like 75 cents, so he's more expensive than some of the stuff we're playing, but still, steal for some of these cards. Obviously, Odric could work pretty well in this deck because we got some flyers, we got some double strikers. All that would be pretty sweet with Odric, so you can dump him in here if you want to. But if you're willing to spend just a little bit of money, White's got a lot of good cards there too for just like over $1 but less than $5. You can get Always Watching, you can get Thalia's Lieutenant, you can get Glorybound Initiate. Those are really, really good cards. You can get Angel of Sanctions, opposite end of the curve there, but you can for like $2.50 right now. Angel of Invention, speaking of 5-drop angels, that's under $5 right now too. I think it's only like $2.50. So like really good deals as far as white rares and mythics right now, because these cards are nothing to sneeze at. Those are not bad cards, and they're all way under $5 at this point. Thalia herself, I don't know if I mentioned that. I said her lieutenant, but Thalia Heretic Cathar, she's only like $2 right now. That is a really good deal. But I am tapped out for this one, and that means that I'm tapped out on this whole budget rares series. We did 5 monocolored decks, all $10, all that used at least 25 rares. I'll put the playlist in the description if you haven't seen any of those yet. But this was a really, really fun exercise in deck building. Sometimes it's nice to give yourself constraints when you build decks. That way, you'll build those card evaluation skills. You know what I mean? Like, you've got a pretty limited amount of choices here, so you got to make the right choices. Of course, that can be harder when you've got a larger card pool, but when you're looking at what appears to be a sea of junk and you have to make it work, that can help out your deck building skills. So this is a good exercise for me, and I hope you guys try stuff like this too. You know, just sharpen that deck builder brain is all I'm saying. But if you want to, do me a favor and go ahead and hit like. Just hitting the thumbs up button helps me out a lot. You can also follow us on Twitter at SBMTGDev. That's another way to know whenever we put out videos. You can check out our Patreon if you like the channel, but you don't necessarily like the crappy resolution. You can check out our Patreon and help us out there, patreon.com/SBMTG, and do all the YouTube stuff. But till next time, guys, I'm Deb from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.